The kids were moments away from being swept away by the rising water, until a farmer did something no one expected. He drove straight into danger with nothing but his tractor. But what happened the next morning shocked the entire town. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. In Redwood County, nestled between rolling wheat fields and winding country roads, folks rely on each other when disaster strikes. The land can look calm: quiet farmsteads, tractors parked neatly in red barns, and children running around dusty yards. But when the weather turns vicious, Redwood County faces the kind of sudden chaos only nature can unleash. On an early summer morning, dark clouds loomed overhead, promising something more ominous than gentle rain. Nobody predicted the severity of the storm, nor how swiftly the creek would swell into a raging torrent. Yet in those critical hours, one farmer named Tom Winston would show everyone the true meaning of community and heroism. He didn't carry a badge or wear a uniform, but he had a lifetime of experience on this land, a battered old tractor, and a heart big enough to do whatever it took to save lives. This is how it happened, beginning on a day that started just like any other in Redwood County. Tom was up before dawn, sipping black coffee in his modest farmhouse kitchen. At 62, he had silver hair and a firm handshake that revealed years of hard work. He glanced out the window at the shifting sky, noticing how quickly the wind bent the trees. "Weather's turning nasty faster than they said," he muttered, shaking his head. His wife, Linda, set a fresh plate of scrambled eggs on the table and tried to reassure him. "We've seen storms before, Tom. Just keep an eye on the creek." Redwood Creek snaked through the county, usually a placid waterway that kids fished in. But if a sudden deluge hit the foothills, that creek could flood in the blink of an eye, causing damage across the farmland. Tom promised Linda he'd do his morning chores, then check the water level. He never suspected that by lunchtime, he'd be wading waist-deep through swirling floodwaters. The storm arrived with startling force. Clouds gathered in great, thunderous columns. Rain hammered the tin roofs of barns and battered the miles of farmland. At first, Redwood County's residents hunkered down, sure that after a couple of hours, the worst would pass. But then the wind came, howling across fields, pushing walls of rain sideways. Phone lines crackled, and old radio towers swayed under the onslaught. As water saturated the ground, the small feeder streams began to merge, bringing all that runoff straight to Redwood Creek. Around mid-morning, the county's emergency radio system lit up with anxious reports. Flash flood warnings in effect for Redwood County. Residents in low-lying areas must seek higher ground immediately. Some folks tried to drive to safety, but many roads were already impassable with floodwaters. Trapped neighborhoods and families started calling for help, uncertain if rescue crews could navigate the watery chaos in time. Tom finished securing the last of his livestock behind the barn, water sloshing around his ankles. He radioed Linda to confirm she was safe in the house. Then, the local sheriff's voice crackled over Tom's battered CB unit. "We've got some folks stranded on the hillside near the old school bus route. Kids on a day camp trip, Tom, 8 of them. The roads are a mess and the county's rescue vehicles can't get close. You're out that way, any chance you can assist?" Tom paused for a heartbeat. The vantage from his property was better than most, giving him a clear look at Redwood Creek's path. He gazed across the fields, saw the swirling waters where farmland used to be. Kids in trouble. He didn't hesitate. "Sheriff, I'm on it. I'll head out with my tractor. Keep me posted if you have any updates." The sheriff sounded relieved. "Roger that, Tom. Stay safe." Careful not to overextend his aging machine, Tom guided his tractor down the muddy track that led from his barn. Visibility was poor. Rain pelted the windshield, and the tractor's old wipers smeared water more than they cleared it. But Tom knew every dip and turn of that trail, each fence post and ditch, because he'd worked this land his entire life. Out on Redwood Road, he found the water was already knee-high in some spots, coursing with a dangerous current. An ordinary truck would have stalled out, but Tom's tractor sat high off the ground, its massive tires cutting through the flood. The engine growled as it pushed onward, unstoppable. Now and then, Tom passed clusters of neighbors perched on their porches, waving at him in desperation, but there wasn't time to stop. His priority was those children. A living memory surfaced in Tom's mind. How, at age 10, he nearly drowned in a creek after a flash flood. A wandering fisherman saved him. Now it was his turn to be that lifesaver. He found them clinging to an old fence near a partially submerged bus stop pavilion. 8 kids, ranging from 7 to 12, soaked to the bone and huddled in fear. 2 teenage camp counselors did their best to keep everyone calm, but the swirling waters threatened to sweep them away if they lost their grip. Tom maneuvered the tractor as close as he dared, heart pounding every time he felt the machine wobble on the slippery ground. He yelled over the roar of the wind, telling them to climb onto the tractor's loading bucket, one at a time. The counselors hoisted the smaller children first, then climbed aboard themselves. Tom couldn't help but notice how the water had already swallowed the road. If they'd been a few minutes later, these kids might have had no chance at all. With everyone on board, Tom reversed, wheels churning through muddy currents. The children sobbed in relief, but the danger wasn't over yet. The trip back was treacherous. Rain battered them, each foot of progress feeling like a victory. A large chunk of debris, possibly a fallen tree trunk, slammed into the tractor's side, nearly tipping it. Tom wrestled the steering, cursing under his breath as the kids screamed. The tractor lurched, but righted itself. Gritting his teeth, Tom continued forward. Muddy water rushed around them, swirling in miniature whirlpools. In the distance, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the farmland turned watery labyrinth. The children clung to each other, wide-eyed and shivering. One of the counselors offered words of encouragement, promising them hot chocolate once this was all over. For Tom, each yard gained felt like a mile, but he pressed on. By the time they reached slightly higher ground near Tom's farm, the kids looked half frozen, but they were alive and safe. As word spread of Tom's daring rescue, more calls poured in. The rescue teams were overwhelmed with emergencies across the county. Elderly residents stranded in flooded homes, pets left on rooftops, and vehicles submerged on back roads. Tom wanted to keep going, to save more, but the children needed immediate shelter and medical checks. Linda was waiting at the farmhouse, having prepared blankets and warm drinks for the drenched kids. A local nurse, stranded by the storm, had taken refuge with Linda earlier and offered to help the shivering group. The counselors thanked Tom profusely, tears of gratitude streaming down their faces. Still, Tom's mind remained on Redwood County's dire situation. He'd heard that entire neighborhoods were cut off by floodwaters. The radio insisted that National Guard units might come, but nobody knew when. Redwood County felt abandoned in the face of an unprecedented flash flood. Night fell, the downpour continuing without mercy. Tom's tractor had already burned through more fuel than he'd planned, so he siphoned from a backup supply he kept in a metal drum behind the barn. Linda pleaded with him to stay put for the night. She feared for his safety if he ventured out again in darkness, especially with the water rising. Tom squeezed her hand, torn between her concern and the knowledge that people might still be out there, needing help. The sheriff's voice crackled over the radio once more, repeating the list of calls. Faint signals from battery-powered phones, scattered SOS requests. Tom closed his eyes, recalling his father's old saying, "A farmer's job is never done, especially when neighbors are in need." He kissed Linda gently and promised to return soon. Then he climbed back into the tractor, determined to do whatever he could until dawn. Morning arrived with a dreary sky. The torrential rain had finally eased, leaving Redwood County drowned under murky waters. Exhausted, Tom drove his tractor homeward. He'd spent the night hauling stranded families to safer ground, ferrying supplies where he could. He was soaked, aching, and emotionally spent, but he refused to quit. Kids, parents, pets. He'd saved more than he could count. As he pulled into his driveway, the sky parted just enough for a slender beam of sunlight to break through. That's when he heard the unmistakable thumping of helicopter blades overhead. In the clearing behind the Winston farm, a National Guard chopper landed, rotor wash, flattening the tall grass. Moments later, a convoy of military trucks rumbled down the battered road, splashing through lingering floodwater. They carried crates of bottled water, blankets, and emergency provisions. Word had reached the state capitol, and the cavalry had finally arrived. Linda rushed outside, relief washing over her face. Tom, leaning wearily on the tractor's steering wheel, gave a silent prayer of thanks. It had been the longest, hardest day of his life, but Redwood County wasn't alone anymore. Tom Winston shut off his tractor's engine and leaned against the metal frame, letting the wave of exhaustion roll through him. He had spent hours in perilous darkness, hauling families out of flooded homes and ferrying supplies across miles of submerged roads. Now, in the gray morning light, he was surrounded by the whir of helicopter blades and the roar of National Guard trucks pulling up to his barn. Rainwater dripped steadily from every corner of the roof, forming muddy pools on the gravel. Linda hurried over, throwing her arms around his neck in a silent, relieved embrace. A tall, broad-shouldered guardsman stepped forward, helmet in his left hand and a clipboard in his right. His uniform was soaked around the collar and splattered with mud near the knees, but he wore the focused look of someone on a mission. "Mr. Winston," he said, "I'm Captain Nolan. We're here with emergency rations, medical kits, and water purification units. We've already got word you were out all night rescuing folks." He glanced at the battered tractor, then at Tom's weary face. "This county owes you a debt, but we'll need your help too. You know the terrain better than we do." Tom looked down at his mud-caked boots, then back up at the captain's earnest expression. "Glad to do whatever I can," he said, clearing his throat. "We've got roads washed out east of Highway 7. Some families are holed up in attics, waiting for water to recede." He remembered a neighbor's frantic radio call about a stranded grandmother, alone in her house as the floodwaters surged. It tore at his heart that he hadn't reached her yet. "If you can get a team ready, we'll figure out how to get through to them," Tom added. Captain Nolan turned and gestured for 2 more guardsmen to join them. "We'll set up a temporary command post in your barn, if that's all right. Radios are spotty, so we'll use the farmland as a helicopter landing zone. Once we gather some intel, I'll have a squad head out on foot, or maybe by boat if the current's too strong." Tom smiled wryly. "A command post in my barn. My father would have gotten a kick out of that." He motioned toward the open barn doors. "You can store your supplies in there and keep your vehicles on the high ground behind the silo. That area rarely floods." One by one, trucks and Humvees rumbled onto the property, their tires spraying mud in wide arcs. The guardsmen unloaded crates of canned goods, pallets of bottled water, and neatly stacked medical kits. A helicopter pilot crouched low under the spinning blades, barking instructions to a group of volunteers who had rushed in from the nearest town. Linda directed people to a dry corner of the barn, showing them where to stack equipment. Every so often, she sent a worried glance toward Tom, who looked dead on his feet but refused to rest. An hour later, Redwood County Sheriff arrived in a battered SUV, his uniform damp. He hopped out and tipped his wide-brimmed hat at Linda. "Morning, ma'am. Heard the cavalry showed up." He came over to Tom, eyebrows scrunched. "We lost contact with the Morgan family around midnight. Any chance you passed by their place?" Tom frowned. He remembered plowing through chest-deep water not far from the Morgans' land. "Didn't see anyone outside," Tom said, "but there were no lights in the house either. Probably they took refuge upstairs. It's a tough property to reach. The creek borders it on 3 sides, and the main bridge is gone." Before the sheriff could reply, Captain Nolan joined them. "We've got 2 amphibious vehicles arriving from the next county," he announced. "We'll send them out as soon as they get here, but that might be another couple of hours. Until then, we're mostly stuck with whatever boats or high-clearance tractors folks can provide. Tom, you able to go back out again?" Linda stepped in, crossing her arms. "He was out all night, Captain. If you send him, you better give him at least a dry coat and a moment to eat something." A quiet laugh rippled through those who overheard. Despite the tension and urgency, her protective stance put a faint smile on Tom's face. "I'm fine," Tom assured her, though his joints ached and his hands trembled from fatigue. "There's a thermos of coffee in the kitchen." Then he turned to Nolan. "I'll do it. The Morgans have a small orchard behind their home. It's on a slight rise. If I can get the tractor to that orchard, we can ferry them back. Let's bring extra blankets." Sheriff Brown gave a satisfied nod. "I'll radio you if we get any calls from them. The phone lines are patchy, but I'll keep trying." He squeezed Tom's shoulder. "Be careful. The current's stronger than I've ever seen." A volley of hammering began on the other side of the barn, where a makeshift communications station was being erected. Tom took Linda's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Don't worry," he murmured. "The minute I can't handle it, I'll turn back." She pressed her lips together and nodded, still looking unconvinced. Tom topped off the tractor's fuel tank while guardsmen strapped rope, medical supplies, and life vests to the back. He tried to ignore the gnawing hunger and the pounding headache behind his eyes, resolved to keep going until everyone who could be saved was reached. Captain Nolan quietly handed him a spare poncho. "I know you're tough, but no sense in getting hypothermia," he said, gently patting Tom's shoulder. Soon Tom and 2 guardsmen set off, following the muddy road that led past a series of pastures. Water still rushed across certain low-lying sections, but the sun had made a welcome appearance, warming Tom's face. With daylight, at least, he could see what lay ahead. Fallen trees, downed power lines, and half-submerged fences littered the landscape, and Tom gritted his teeth each time the tractor jostled over hidden debris. A lone cow stood in a field, water up to its belly, staring forlornly as they passed. "Let's mark that location," one guardsman said. "We'll report it when we get back, see if local ranchers can rescue their livestock." Tom pressed on. No sign of the Morgan place yet, though he recognized familiar landmarks, a gnarled oak, a broken windmill. Finally, in the distance, he spotted the farmhouse, its lower level surrounded by swirling water. He parked the tractor at the orchard's edge, where the ground was still above flood level, and shut off the engine. "We'll have to wade," he said, stepping down into ankle-deep mud. The guardsmen followed, gripping ropes tied to the tractor in case the current knocked them off balance. Step by cautious step, they approached the house, calling out for anyone inside. A faint voice answered from an upstairs window. "We're here. We can't get down. The staircase is flooded." "Hang tight," Tom yelled. "We'll get you out." One of the guardsmen found a broken ladder, rigged it against the roof's overhang, and scrambled up. Within minutes, they helped 2 people climb onto the roof, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, both in their 60s, wearing sodden pajamas and thin jackets. Their faces showed immense relief at seeing Tom. The old man coughed, sounding winded. "Anyone else inside?" asked the younger guardsman. Morgan shook his head, water dripping from his hair. "Just the 2 of us. Blessed that you came along." With methodical care, Tom guided them across the makeshift bridge they fashioned by laying the ladder from the roof to a low tree limb. The entire orchard was a quagmire of sludge, but at least it wasn't flowing water. Tom and the guardsmen half-carried the couple to the tractor, where extra blankets waited. One of the guardsmen radioed in. "Found the Morgan family. 2 individuals. No injuries, mild hypothermia. Returning to command post." The moment the tractor rumbled back into motion, Mrs. Morgan's eyes welled with tears of gratitude. She and her husband clutched each other, shivering, but safe. Tom managed a tired grin. Every rescue, every life spared, felt like a quiet miracle. On the return route, the guardsman pointed out a collapsed barn roof in the distance. Smoke drifted near it, possibly from a generator shorting. A fleeting thought crossed Tom's mind. There would be no shortage of heartbreak once the waters receded. Buildings lost, crops destroyed, roads washed away. Still, Redwood County was resilient. People here stood by one another. He pressed the accelerator gently, cautioning himself to keep an eye on the deep ruts. The day was far from over. It didn't matter that his arms ached from fighting the wheel or that a wave of dizziness threatened whenever he turned his head too fast. More neighbors needed help, and Redwood County was counting on him and the National Guard. By the time Tom's tractor lumbered up the path to his barn, the sun was high, glinting off massive puddles scattered across fields. The Morgans were ushered inside, where Linda fussed over them with steaming mugs of broth. Captain Nolan hurried out, relief etched on his face. "You found them," he said. "Good job. We've got more calls, though. A couple families on the far side of the creek are stuck behind a washed-out culvert." Tom simply nodded, shoulders sagging. "Just point me in the right direction." Linda grabbed his sleeve. "First, you're eating something, Tom Winston. I won't have you collapsing mid-rescue." She practically dragged him into the kitchen, and for once, Tom allowed it. Something in him understood that rest, even if brief, was as vital as fuel for the tractor. He wolfed down a peanut butter sandwich, while Captain Nolan mapped out the next route. Linda refilled Tom's thermos with scalding coffee. Then, stepping outside, Tom saw the guardsman loading more relief crates into a separate truck. The swirling hum of a helicopter soared overhead, carrying hope to some other corner of Redwood County. For the first time since the storm began, Tom felt a small flicker of optimism. They might just get through this, one rescue at a time. Tom Winston rubbed at his tired eyes, wishing he could indulge in a few more minutes of rest. But with so many people still stranded, he couldn't bear to waste a second. Outside, the National Guard's temporary command post bustled with activity. Radios squawked updates about roads blocked by fallen trees, while neighbors showed up offering small fishing boats or canoes. Even though Redwood County was badly battered, its residents refused to stand by helplessly. They arrived at Tom's farm in battered pickups, each prepared to lend a hand however they could. Captain Nolan was on the barn's improvised loading dock, pointing at a large county map pinned to a plank of wood. "This area by Maple Road," he said, tapping a spot with his pen, "is going under faster than anticipated. The levee up north is starting to breach. We've got time to get folks out, but not much." A cluster of guardsmen and local volunteers stood around him. One man, wearing a baseball cap that dripped onto his collar, lifted his hand. "I've got a small outboard motor and a flat-bottom boat I can tow. Might get us through the back roads, if we can float across the shoulders." Tom approached in time to hear this idea. The single cup of coffee and peanut butter sandwich had renewed a glimmer of his energy. "That could work," he said, nodding. "Maple Road is usually passable, but I took a glance last night. Some parts looked like an extension of Redwood Creek. If your boat can handle the current, we might ferry people across." The volunteer introduced himself as Brent Carter, a rancher from the western side of the county. Brent's weathered face bore worry lines and exhaustion, yet he spoke with the unwavering steadiness of a man who knew how to solve problems. Before long, the plan was set. Tom, Brent, and 2 guardsmen would hitch the small boat to the back of Tom's tractor, inch their way to the Maple Road area, and try to rescue families caught in the low-lying farmland. If the water proved too deep for the tractor, they'd cut the boat loose and proceed by motor. Captain Nolan clapped Tom on the shoulder. "Just keep radio contact," he said. "If it's too dangerous, pull back and watch for downed power lines. Some lines may still be live." Linda overheard the warning and frowned, her expression etched with concern. "You watch yourself," she told Tom, her voice quiet but firm. He gave her a quick squeeze of the hand, understanding that she was holding back a storm of anxiety beneath her calm words. Within minutes, Tom had the tractor rumbling again, Brent's trailer hitched behind, a small aluminum skiff lashed in place. 2 guardsmen, Morales and Cooper, rode in back, armed with first aid packs and rope. Rain-soaked fields stretched in every direction, the early sunlight reflecting on the floodwaters. On the main road, Tom guided them around downed branches and swirling puddles, each obstacle an unwelcome reminder of the night's devastation. They soon reached a familiar intersection. Normally, Maple Road would be just around the bend, with farmland sloping away gently on both sides. Now, a vast brown lake shone where fields had once stood, shimmering ominously in the morning light. Tom stopped the tractor at the high point of the road, surveying the watery expanse before him. "We'll keep to the left," he told Brent, pointing to a line of telephone poles just visible above the water's surface. "That's the shallower side. If we hug them, we might avoid deeper channels." Brent unhooked the skiff from the trailer. "Let's see how far we can get with the tractor first. If it gets dicey, we shift to the boat." Cooper checked the depth with a measuring pole, wading forward until water reached mid-thigh. "This might be passable for another 100 yards, maybe less," he called. "After that, it drops off." The group piled back onto the tractor, and Tom eased forward. Water rose around the wheels, swirling ominously. The engine strained as he guided them past half-submerged mailboxes and the tips of fence posts. The smell of wet earth and spilled gasoline hung in the air. They advanced slowly, scanning for hidden debris. In the distance, half-drowned sheds peeked over the waterline, their tin roofs glinting. Eventually, the tractor's tires began losing traction, sinking deeper. Tom halted. "This is it," he said, throwing the engine into neutral. "We go by boat from here." They anchored the tractor to a sturdy telephone pole with a length of rope, hoping any unexpected current wouldn't push it off the road altogether. Then they slid the skiff into the water, testing the motor's idle. It sputtered but caught, sending out a plume of exhaust. Brent, an experienced fisherman, took the helm. Tom and Cooper climbed in carefully, while Morales stayed behind to guard the tractor and maintain radio contact. As the little boat puttered away, Tom studied the vacant skyline of Maple Road, trying to guess where each flooded house might be. Sometimes he recognized a tall pine or a silo cresting the waves. Each sign spurred him to wonder if the owners were stranded inside, waiting desperately for rescue. They spotted the first house by its distinctive red chimney stack. Water lapped at the second-story windows, and from a tiny gable vent, Tom saw the anxious face of Mrs. Peterson, the retired teacher who'd lived there alone since her husband passed. She gave a feeble wave, relief washing over her expression. In moments, the boat was alongside her house. "Hang on, ma'am!" Brent yelled. "We'll get you out!" Tom scrambled onto the roof, hooking a rope to the chimney. He kicked in a small dormer window to gain access. Inside, he found Mrs. Peterson perched on a hallway table, the water only a few inches below her feet. She clutched an old photograph of her husband in a soggy handbag. Tom helped her through the dormer, shielding her from the jagged edges of the broken glass, then lowered her into the boat. She was shaking so badly that Cooper draped a blanket around her shoulders right away. "Thank God," she breathed. "I didn't think anyone would come." Tom just gave her hand a reassuring pat. The next home was a few hundred yards away, belonging to the Morris family. They had 2 small kids, and Tom's heart pounded, hoping the family had found refuge in a high spot. Sure enough, Mr. and Mrs. Morris stood on a makeshift platform they'd assembled from plywood and crates, water swirling around them. Their children clung to each side. Brent cut the motor and shouted for them to stay calm. Tom tossed a rope, and Mr. Morris tied it to the porch railing. Over the next few minutes, they ferried the entire Morris family into the skiff, passing them carefully along the line. One child had a bandaged arm, and Tom noticed the mother's tears as she tried to keep her daughter still. Cooper checked the wound, discovered it was minor, and gave the girl a fresh bandage. The mother couldn't stop thanking them. As they moved from house to house, the boat filled up. Over a dozen residents were rescued in that stretch, each person telling harrowing stories of how fast the water rose during the night. A few recalled hearing vehicles or tractors pass in darkness, but no one had been able to signal help. Others had considered trying to wade through the flood themselves, but lost their nerve when they felt the current tugging their ankles. At one point, a large piece of debris, a section of broken fence, floated past with surprising speed, slamming into the skiff's bow. Brent cursed, revving the motor to push them clear, and Tom grabbed the boat's side to stay upright. They glided around a half-submerged oak tree, then spotted yet another roof poking above the waterline. The day blurred into a series of tense approaches and wary greetings, with the boat sometimes scraping submerged trash or tangling in coils of barbed wire. Each time, Tom's heart hammered with the fear of something punching a hole in the hull, but the skiff never faltered. When they returned to the tractor, Morales helped everyone disembark onto the narrow patch of pavement. Some of the rescued neighbors huddled in the skiff or on the road, waiting for the second run. Tom volunteered to stay behind so they could ferry more people. "I'll hold the fort here," he said, shivering despite the midday sun. He waved as Brent powered the boat away, leaving him, Morales, and an older man named Mr. Henderson behind. They sat near the tractor, gazing at the water that had swallowed entire farmsteads. Henderson leaned against a telephone pole, wiping water from his brow. "Been in this county 40 years, he murmured. "Never seen anything like this." Morales checked the radio for updates but only got static, so he tried a different frequency. "Command post, this is Unit 5. We have approximately 15 civilians on site waiting transport. Over." Silence. Morales repeated the message twice more. Finally, a crackle. "Copy that, Unit 5. We're stretched thin. Suggest you hold position until the second boat arrives from town. Over." Morales sighed, glancing at Tom. "Guess we're stuck here a while." Tom's gaze drifted across the drowned fields. Even from a distance, the damage was heartbreaking. Bent telephone poles, battered houses, livestock stranded or lost. Yet somewhere in the midst of tragedy, there was also a quiet hope. People were coming together, neighbors, volunteers, and guardsmen. Looking at Henderson's tired but grateful face, Tom nodded to himself. Maybe Redwood County wouldn't ever be quite the same. But if they could save lives, if they could stand together in this crisis, then the rebuilding would be possible. "Tom!" a voice rang across the water. He turned to see Brent guiding the skiff back, now carrying 2 more rescued families. The boat was riding low with weight, but it made steady progress. Tom moved to help tie off the rope so they could unload. Rain clouds lurked again in the western sky, a reminder that the weather might not be done. But they would face it, just as they had faced every other obstacle these past 24 hours. While Tom waited by the partially flooded road, the heavy air clung to his skin. Overhead, the sky flickered with the promise of more rain, even though the sun still shone in stubborn patches. Brent's return trip took longer than expected, and Tom's unease grew with every passing minute. Mr. Henderson, seated on an overturned crate, tried to calm one of the rescued teenagers, who kept asking if anyone had seen her dog. Morales alternated between scanning the horizons and fiddling with the radio's dials, trying to reach the command post back at Tom's barn. Finally, the whir of a small outboard motor echoed across the water. The aluminum skiff came into view, loaded with a half-dozen more people, including 2 anxious parents clutching a toddler. A sigh of relief escaped Tom's lips. He hurried to secure the rope, guiding the boat to the narrow patch of road that still poked above the flood. Once they were sure it wouldn't drift, Brent cut the motor. The new arrivals climbed out, some stumbling as the swirling water tugged at their knees. "It's getting worse out there," Brent muttered, wiping sweat and rain from his brow. "The current's picking up. We had to circle around floating junk, Doors, furniture, you name it. I don't think we can safely go much farther. Tom nodded soberly, helping a frightened mother wrap a blanket around her crying toddler. The day's heat pressed down on them, turning the watery landscape into a steamy haze. We've done all we can here, he said, scanning the horizon for any sign of more rooftops. We should head back and regroup. The group huddled around the tractor, which was still tethered by rope to the telephone pole. Morales called out on the radio again. Unit 5 to command. We're returning with approximately 20 people total. Some need medical attention. Over. Static hissed until Captain Nolan's voice finally crackled through. Copy, Unit 5. Proceed to Winston Farm. We'll have transport ready. They arranged themselves carefully. Several rescues would ride in the skiff, while the rest walked alongside the tractor on the high part of the road. Brent steered the boat, Tom steered the tractor, and Morales led the column on foot, holding Mr. Henderson's arm to keep him steady. Though the distance wasn't great, it felt like crossing a war zone. Floodwater slapped at ankles, logs drifted dangerously close, and once or twice they had to stop to push away a floating chunk of fence. By the time they reached a stretch of dry pavement, the families in tow were exhausted, sweaty, and shaky. Some carried what few possessions they'd salvaged: small bags, photo albums wrapped in plastic, a child's stuffed rabbit. Every item told a story of a life uprooted by a single night of torrential rain. Tom's tractor rumbled along slowly, and he peered back over his shoulder, counting to make sure no one lagged behind. At last, they reached the last half-mile, where land began to rise. 2 National Guard trucks idled near a battered sign welcoming travelers to Redwood County. On spotting Tom and his group, the guardsmen jumped down, assisting the rescued families into the truck beds. The toddler's mother broke into sobs of relief when she saw a paramedic waiting. "Thank you," she whispered to Tom, voice trembling. I thought we'd be forgotten out there." Tom gave a tired smile. "Nobody's forgotten. We'll get you someplace safe." One truck pulled away, carrying rescued residents back toward the improvised shelter at the local high school. The second truck lingered while Morales and Brent unloaded the skiff. Tom was about to climb aboard his tractor for the final leg back to the barn when the radio squawked again. "Command to Winston. Do you copy?" Tom grabbed the handheld from Morales. "Winston here. Go ahead." Nolan's voice sounded urgent. "Tom, we just got a distress call from the Orchard Road near the old airstrip. The Peterson orchard is halfway under, and there are reports of kids trapped on a school bus. We can't get a helicopter in because the wind's picking up again. Think you can handle it?" Tom felt a jolt of anxiety. A stranded bus full of children was every rescuer's nightmare, especially on roads as submerged as these. "All right," Tom said. "Send me the coordinates. I'll do my best." "Roger that. A ground unit is en route, but they're stuck behind debris. You're our fastest option from your current location." Tom quickly explained the situation to Brent and Morales. Without hesitation, Morales offered to come along. Brent, however, needed to manage the boat, which had sprung a small leak from the rough collisions with debris. So Tom and Morales hopped onto the tractor, leaving Brent to patch the skiff and help ferry stragglers. They parted with quick handshakes, adrenaline pulsing through them all. Though the Orchard Road was only a couple of miles away, the route demanded a slow crawl over broken asphalt and flood-slick fields. The swirl of returning rains on the horizon turned the day even grayer. Morales kept scanning the radio frequencies for updates, but the emergency lines were jammed with other calls. A rumor drifted through about a second levee breach to the east, though nobody had confirmed it yet. Redwood County, it seemed, faced crisis after crisis. When they finally crested a small hill, Tom saw the bright yellow roof of a school bus half buried in muddy water. It lay tilted at an angle near a cluster of orchard trees whose tops created a precarious canopy. Nearby, an overrun ditch gushed across the road, forcing the bus to stall. Tom's throat constricted. He'd never faced a rescue quite like this, An entire bus, possibly with limited exit paths. He slowed the tractor, surveying the safest approach. They hopped down to test the water depth with a pole. It came up waist-high, the current swift but not impossible. Morales pulled on a life vest. "If the kids are stuck inside, we'll need to pry open the emergency door," he said, voice taut. "Any chance you've got a chain or something we can hook to the tractor?" Tom rummaged in the side compartment of the tractor, retrieving a sturdy chain. "Used it for towing vehicles out of ditches in winter," he explained grimly. "Never thought I'd use it for pulling a bus out of a flood." They waded toward the bus. Water sloshed around Tom's waist, tugging at his legs. He swallowed nerves, calling out in the loudest voice he could manage. "Anybody in there? This is Tom Winston. We're here to help." A muffled shout answered. Then, through the half-open window, Tom glimpsed a young face. The child looked terrified, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The driver's unconscious," came a high-pitched voice from somewhere behind her. "He hit his head when we slid." Morales reached the bus door, which was partly jammed by a branch. He braced himself against the hood, then used a crowbar from his gear to pry at the battered metal. After a minute of desperate effort, the door gave way with a screech. Inside, a group of 8 or 9 children crowded near the aisle. Some were crying, others shivering in soaked jackets. The driver slumped in his seat, a nasty gash above one brow. Tom climbed up first, rummaging for a first aid kit. He found the driver's pulse was steady but faint. "We've got to move fast," Morales said, scanning the bus interior. Water trickled in through a crack in the floor. If the current rose any higher, the bus could tip or get swept further downstream. Tom pulled off his drenched jacket, draping it around a little girl. He spoke calmly. "All right, kids, we're getting you out one by one. Everyone follow me. No pushing. Stay close." Morales stepped back outside, hooking the chain to the rear bumper. The plan was to attach the chain to Tom's tractor, then try to pull the bus at least a few yards to higher ground. But first, they had to evacuate everyone inside. One by one, the kids followed Tom to the door. Morales offered them a life vest or a rope to cling to as they stepped down into the water. The older ones guided the younger children. They formed a shaky line, trudging through the orchard's submerged rows until they reached the slight rise where Tom had parked. Everyone breathed easier once the kids were safe, though the driver remained unconscious, requiring careful handling. Morales and Tom carried him through the swirling water, mindful not to jostle his injury. It took all their strength to keep him from slipping. Once the bus stood empty, Morales waded back to secure the chain. Tom climbed onto the tractor, adjusting the chain's slack, then tried inching forward. The tractor's engine growled, straining at the load. At first, the bus didn't budge. Tom eased on the throttle, not wanting to snap the chain or spin the tires. After a tense few seconds, the bus lurched, metal scraping across the asphalt. Ever so slowly, it began to shift out of the deeper water. Cheers erupted from the kids huddled behind the orchard trees. Tom guided the tractor up another few yards. Water drained from the bus floor, gushing in muddy rivulets. Once he had it clear of the immediate current, Tom cut the engine. He and Morales slipped off the tractor, double-checking the bus's new position. Though it was still partly submerged, at least it wasn't at risk of flipping. Tom exhaled, shoulders sagging. The kids were safe, the driver rescued, and Redwood County had narrowly avoided another tragedy. Morales wiped his forehead, a flicker of a grin appearing despite the dire circumstances. "You did it again," he told Tom. "That's at least 24 souls you've saved since this mess started." But Tom's smile faded as he glanced at the driver's unconscious form. "We're not done yet," he said. "He needs a medic pronto, and these kids need shelter." The orchard's old farm building might serve as a temporary shield, but that didn't solve the long-term crisis. He stared at the battered bus, water swirling around its tires, and wondered how many more rescues lay ahead. Though the orchard still lay partially underwater, Tom and Morales managed to shepherd the frightened children and their unconscious bus driver into a dry spot near a half-standing wooden shed. The orchard itself was a scene of broken branches, scattered fruit, and knee-deep water flowing through the rows of trees. A quick glance told Tom that using this old shed as a makeshift shelter was the safest option for the moment. The children were trembling, soaked from the rescue, and the unconscious driver needed attention right away. Morales bent down beside the driver, who was propped on a tarp Tom found inside the shed. The driver's breathing was shallow, and although the bleeding from his head wound had slowed, he clearly required proper medical care. Morales pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, counting quietly under his breath. Then he lifted his gaze to Tom. "He's stable for now, but we need a medic with better equipment," he said. Tom nodded. "I'll get on the radio." He stepped outside, scanning the orchard's edge for higher ground. The orchard road was still submerged, except for a ridge maybe 50 yards away. The swirling water didn't look as fast there, so Tom trudged across the soggy earth, the mud grabbing at his boots. From that slight rise, he fiddled with the handheld radio, trying to hail the National Guard command post. Raindrops spattered down, warning that another wave of bad weather might be on the way. "Winston to command," Tom said, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got 8 or 9 kids, plus an unconscious bus driver, by the Peterson orchard. Need medical evac if possible. Over." Static. He pressed the button again, repeating his plea. Finally, Captain Nolan's voice crackled through. "Tom, we're swamped at the moment, literally. The levee breach cut off half our routes, and we're relocating people left and right. We'll try to dispatch a medic as soon as we can. Hang tight." Tom exhaled, glancing at the orchard behind him. He could practically feel the kids' fear from where he stood. "Understood. Let me know if you can get a chopper in. Over." Nolan didn't sound optimistic. He explained that high winds and the continuing storms made helicopter rescues risky, so ground crews were best. Then the radio cut out, leaving Tom with only the hush of wind in the trees. Returning to the shed, he relayed the news. Morales sighed, eyes on the driver's pallid face. "Guess we'll have to keep him stable until help arrives," Morales said. The children, huddled together in a corner, looked up hopefully. Tom crouched beside them, speaking gently. "We've got blankets and some snacks in the tractor. Let's see if we can get them." Morales grabbed the rope they'd used to anchor the bus and carefully tied one end to a sturdy post on the shed. Then he handed the other end to Tom. "I'll head out to the tractor," Morales said. "You keep watch here. We don't want these kids wandering into deeper water." Tom agreed, relieved that someone was able to make the short but tricky trip to the tractor for supplies. While Morales picked his way through chest-deep sections of flood, Tom worked to calm the children. 2 of the older boys tried to be stoic, hugging each other for warmth, while a younger girl, maybe 7, kept whimpering about her missing backpack. Tom gently explained that their only priority now was staying safe. He glanced at the bus driver, wishing the man would stir or at least mutter a coherent word. A few minutes later, Morales returned, dragging a small cooler and a bag of provisions from the tractor's storage box. He'd managed to find a pile of thick tarps as well. "Didn't see any immediate route for a quick exit," he said, panting. "But at least we've got something to keep the kids warm." Tom took the tarps and spread them over the orchard's damp floor. The children curled up on them, grateful for the slight comfort. Morales fished out protein bars, handing them around. The unconscious driver groaned softly, which was a good sign. Morales checked the bandage. "We can't move him too far," he said, "or we risk aggravating that head injury." Tom rubbed the back of his neck, torn between the desire to rush everyone to safer ground and the knowledge that any misstep could cost a life. "We'll wait for the guard," he said finally. They settled into a tense rhythm, listening for the sound of approaching trucks or helicopters. The orchard's thick canopy rustled in the breeze and occasionally a branch snapped off, and drifted away in the flood, leaving a hollow hush behind. Time seemed to slow, each minute drawn out by the constant anxiety swirling around them. Tom tried to distract the children with small talk about farm life. He explained how apple trees were pruned each winter, how bees pollinated the blossoms each spring. One boy, no older than 10, stared at him with wide eyes. "My mom's going to be so mad," the boy whispered. "I didn't tell her we were even going on this trip." Tom ruffled the boy's damp hair. "She'll just be happy you're safe," Tom assured him. Though in truth he didn't know how many parents were already frantic, searching for news of their missing children. Eventually they heard the distant rumble of an engine. Morales stiffened. "Could be the guard," he said hopefully, stepping out to wave from under the orchard trees. But the approaching vehicle sounded more like a pickup than a Humvee, and when it finally came into view, Tom recognized the battered old truck belonging to a local orchard caretaker named Celia Roberts. She maneuvered carefully along the orchard's higher ground, wincing at the edges of deep puddles. "Celia!" Tom called, beckoning her closer. She parked near the crest where Tom had tried the radio. Climbing out, she shouted over the wind, "I heard a bus might have been stranded here. Thought I'd come see if I could help." Tom explained the situation quickly. Celia's face hardened with resolve. "We've got a barn behind the orchard house. It's on a slight hill, might be even drier than this shed. If we can get those kids that way, I can drive them out with a larger wagon or something." It wasn't a perfect plan. The orchard's house was a solid half-mile across mud and water, but maybe that barn sat on high enough ground. Tom turned to Morales. "The National Guard said they're spread thin. If we can get the kids out ourselves, it might be quicker." Morales nodded. "But what about the driver? We can't jostle him too badly." Celia thought for a moment, then pointed at her truck. "I have a tarp and some planks we can lash together to form a makeshift stretcher. It won't be comfortable, but if we're careful, we can carry him to the barn." So that became their plan. In small groups, they guided the children through the orchard, Celia leading them around the deeper sections. Tom and Morales rigged a stretcher for the driver, propping a plank on top of the tarp and padding it with a few folded blankets. It took all their combined strength to keep him stable as they waited. Every step, water sucked at their ankles, forcing them to inch forward in unison. The driver stirred once, letting out a low moan that spurred them to move even faster. It felt like hours, though it might have been 30 minutes at most. At last they emerged onto higher ground behind the orchard's main house. Indeed, the barn there was mostly dry, its old wooden doors flung open to reveal a dusty interior. Celia quickly ushered the kids inside, while Tom and Morales laid the driver down in a corner where morning light streamed through warped slats. Celia rummaged for a first aid kit, bandages, anything else that could help. "There's a side road here," Celia said, pointing beyond a field that showed only patches of standing water. "It's rutted, but it might be passable for a four-wheel drive. If the guard or an ambulance can reach us from that direction, we won't have to go back through the orchard." Tom nodded wearily. He was caked in mud up to his thighs, and the lingering ache in his shoulders flared each time he lowered the makeshift stretcher. The children huddled together in the barn's driest corner, some falling into an exhausted doze. Morales flicked his radio on again. This time the signal was faint but clear enough for them to exchange short updates with Captain Nolan. "We've got the bus driver and kids in an old barn near the orchard house," Morales said, speaking loudly to overcome static. "Anyone who can bring a four-wheel drive or medical transport, come in from the southern route if possible." Nolan replied, "We'll try to dispatch a paramedic and a suitable vehicle. Stand by. Over." Then the radio hissed into silence. Now it was a matter of waiting once again. Tom found a wooden crate to sit on, massaging his temples. The orchard's caretaker stepped outside to check on her truck, returning moments later with a small bag of apples she'd salvaged. She offered them around, apologizing for their bruises. Nobody complained. They tasted like relief. Even the children perked up at the chance to eat something sweet. After a few minutes, the bus driver stirred more noticeably. His eyes fluttered open, gaze unfocused, but he tried to speak. "Kids, are they safe?" Tom moved closer, gripping the man's hand gently. "They're fine. You did good," he told him. "We'll get you to a hospital soon." The driver squeezed Tom's hand weakly and closed his eyes again, spent but seemingly reassured. Tom glanced at Morales, who was sipping water from a canteen. "I hope that medic arrives soon. The weather's not looking any friendlier." Indeed, the clouds overhead darkened once more, a distant rumble portending another storm front. Redwood County, battered by the worst flood in living memory, braced itself for yet another onslaught. Tom forced down a surge of dread. They would cope, rescue after rescue, until they had nothing left to give, or until the rains finally stopped. For almost an hour, Tom, Morales, and Celia waited in the orchard barn, keeping a close eye on the injured driver and trying to keep the rescued children calm. Each time Tom paced to the door to check the sky, he saw thicker clouds gathering. Wind rattled the barn's old wooden boards, and the air smelled of fresh rain about to fall. The children, huddled on makeshift bedding of tarps and blankets, dozed in fits. A few whispered anxiously about their parents. Morales stayed near the bus driver, monitoring his pulse and replacing the damp cloth on his brow. Celia went back and forth to her truck, returning with occasional supplies. A few jugs of clean water, spare flashlight batteries, a handful of apples no one else had bothered to pick from the orchard. At last, faint engine noise reached them. Tom stepped outside, scanning the orchard's perimeter. A National Guard ambulance, flanked by a wide-tired Humvee, crept along the muddy side road. Relief washed over Tom. Clearly, word had gotten through. He jogged toward the approaching vehicles, waving them forward to the barn's entrance. The ambulance came to a halt on a patch of gravel that poked above the flood. Two medics jumped out, a woman with braided hair beneath her helmet and a tall, wiry man wearing a fluorescent vest. They sprinted across the short distance to the barn, backpacks full of medical gear slung over their shoulders. Morales guided them straight to the driver, stepping aside so they could begin a proper evaluation. One of the medics, the woman, carefully shone a penlight into the driver's eyes, then pressed a stethoscope against his chest. Tom hovered nearby, arms folded, refusing to interrupt. He watched every subtle gesture, anxious for a sign that the driver would be all right. At last, the female medic turned, nodding reassuringly. "He's got a concussion, maybe some mild shock, but his vitals are holding. We'll get him onto a stretcher in the ambulance." Hearing that, Tom exhaled. "Thank you," he said, meaning it more deeply than words could express. "The kids have been waiting too. Some might need a quick check. Most are just cold, hungry, and scared." With a gentle smile, the medic explained that the Humvee had extra blankets, plus a few meal kits for emergencies. Another guardsman came inside, distributing the kits to grateful children. Tom noticed how even the older ones tore into the rations, ravenous after the ordeal. Within minutes, they had the driver strapped to a stretcher. The medics maneuvered him into the ambulance, while Captain Nolan himself emerged from the passenger seat of the Humvee. He nodded at Tom, relief and determination in his expression. "Had to circle half the county to reach you," Nolan said. "Roads keep collapsing, but we'll get these kids out safely." Tom introduced him to Celia. She gave the captain a succinct overview of orchard conditions and which roads might still be navigable. Nolan listened intently, occasionally checking coordinates on a handheld GPS. "The orchard house is okay for now," Celia added. "But if the water rises, we might lose the side road. Best to evacuate everyone, not just the kids." Nolan agreed. He gestured for two of his guardsmen to begin leading the children to the Humvee. Most kids were able to walk, though a couple needed gentle support. The littlest ones clutched Celia's hands, tears mixing with fresh raindrops. The orchard caretaker spoke softly to them, promising they'd see their families soon. Meanwhile, Tom and Morales helped load the last of the supplies into the truck's cargo space. Before they all departed, Captain Nolan pulled Tom aside. "Listen, there's fresh trouble by the river crossing near Adams Mill," he said, voice low. "That levee breach is funneling water straight into the farmland. If folks there don't get out fast, we could lose half that community." Tom's chest tightened. "What do you need from me?" His voice held exhaustion, but also readiness to act. He had come too far to stop now. Nolan rubbed a hand over the stubble on his chin. "We've got one amphibious vehicle heading that way, but I'd like you and Morales to see if the tractor can help ferry folks. Your local knowledge has been indispensable." He glanced at Tom's mud-streaked clothes. "But I wouldn't blame you if you say no. You've done enough to last a lifetime." Tom looked over at the newly arrived ambulance. One by one, the Orchard kids were climbing in, weary but alive. He remembered the Morgan couple, the bus rescue, the families stranded in attics. Each success meant Redwood County was that much closer to surviving. "I'll do it," Tom said, swallowing his fatigue. "Just let me grab some fresh diesel from Celia's barn. I'm running low again." Nolan's gratitude was evident, though he tried not to show too much emotion. "All right. I'll radio your wife. Let her know you'll be on a different route. Let's be careful." Tom mustered a nod. "Thank you, Captain." As Tom set about refueling the tractor, Morales approached, overhearing the plan. He readily agreed to continue, though Tom saw the deep lines of exhaustion on the guardsman's face. "We're both crazy," Morales said with a faint grin. "But if we can save more people, it's worth it." Celia provided a metal canister of diesel, plus a spare jug of water. She shook Tom's hand. "You're a hero, you know that?" Tom's cheeks reddened under the layer of grime. "Just doing what anyone would," he mumbled. She didn't argue, merely smiled. "Take care, Tom Winston. We'll keep an eye on the orchard until the waters recede." Soon, the Orchard children and the bus driver were safely away with the guard convoy, and Tom's tractor rumbled back onto the muddy side road. Morales kept an eye on the shifting clouds overhead. The wind whipped branches back and forth, darkening the sky well before midday. "Rain's coming," he warned. "Might get heavier than we've seen in the last few hours." Tom's grip tightened on the wheel. "Let's hope we can beat it to Adams Mill." Adams Mill was a small settlement near the southwestern edge of Redwood County, built around an old grain mill that had ceased operation decades ago. The farmland there was low-lying, hugging the banks of the Redwood River. The drive took them across battered roads littered with branches and sheets of corrugated metal. Twice they had to stop, so Morales could clear debris from the tractor's path. With every mile, the flood grew more menacing. At last, they crested a gentle rise, revealing the valley around Adams Mill. The sight made Tom's throat constrict. Water shimmered across fields, merging with the river to form a wide expanse of brown-gray turbulence. The remnants of fences jutted up at odd angles, and what had once been farmland was now a vast lagoon. Distant rooftops rose from the water, marking the whereabouts of farmhouses. The old mill itself stood on slightly elevated ground, but everything else looked perilously submerged. Tom eased the tractor forward until he spotted an amphibious guard vehicle parked on a patch of dirt that resembled a small island. Two guardsmen waved them over. Morales hopped down to talk, returning moments later with an update. "They've rescued a few families, but there are more. They can't handle it alone." The amphibious craft, a wide-bodied rig on big tires, was partially damaged from striking submerged debris. They were waiting on parts. "Then let's get moving," Tom said. He studied a row of houses that seemed just within reach if they navigated carefully. "We could hitch a boat, but do we have any around?" Morales shook his head. "No boat here. We'll rely on the tractor's height. If the water's too deep, we might be out of luck." The sky rumbled ominously, a reminder that time was short. Tom revved the tractor's engine, inching toward the watery edge, with Morales walking ahead to check the depth. The guardsman from the amphibious vehicle trailed behind, prepared with ropes, flotation devices, and a first aid kit. Every yard was a risk. Tom felt the front tires sink, water swirling around the axle. A surge of doubt flickered through him. Would he be able to pull out if it got deeper? Then he saw a figure waving from an upstairs window. A small farmhouse stood about 50 yards from the ragged shoreline, the water lapping at its lower windows. Tom recognized the place from years ago, though he couldn't recall the family's name. That didn't matter now. Inside were people who needed help. Morales gestured that he could wade no further. Tom killed the tractor's engine, set the brake, and hopped into the murky water, gritting his teeth at the cold. They slogged forward together, occasionally sinking knee-deep in hidden ruts. A faint voice drifted from the house. "Help! We have an infant in here!" That was all Tom needed to hear. Summoning strength, he shouldered the small pack that held rope and first aid. They reached the front porch, which was mostly submerged. The front door was stuck, so Morales used a crowbar to pry it loose. Inside, water drenched the floor. A young woman stood on a staircase, holding a blanketed bundle in her arms. Beside her, an older man leaned against the banister, breathing hard. "My father's not well," she said anxiously, "and the baby's only 2 weeks old." Tom nodded, scanning the interior. "Let's get you upstairs first, check your father." They moved up to the second floor, where the older man sank onto a bed, coughing. Morales quickly offered him sips of water, while Tom confirmed the baby was all right. The young mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "We've been trapped since last night," she murmured, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The phone died and the water just kept rising." Morales radioed the amphibious guardsman. They responded that they'd found an older couple a quarter-mile away, needing help too. Tom turned to the mother. "We'll take you to the tractor. If the water's not too high, we can drive out." She swallowed nervously, glancing at her father. "He can barely walk." "It's all right," Tom said, forcing a reassuring tone. "We'll carry him if we have to." With the father's arms slung around Tom's shoulder and Morales protecting the mother and baby, they descended the stairs. The father wheezed, protesting that he was too heavy, but Tom gritted his teeth. Step by step, they pushed through the water, cringing each time the older man stumbled. Outside, the sky opened, sending fresh rain in slanted sheets. The mother shielded her infant's head with the sodden blanket. By the time they reached the tractor, the father was nearly unconscious from exertion. Morales hoisted him onto the back bench seat. The mother climbed up too, clutching the baby to her chest. Tom fired the engine, breathing thanks that it started on the first try. Ahead lay more flooded fields, more uncertain roads, and a pounding storm. But Redwood County needed every bit of help it could get. Tom refused to stop until every last neighbor was safe. Dark clouds churned overhead as Tom Winston coaxed the tractor forward across the watery fields near Adams Mill, mindful of each submerged ditch and unpredictable current. The older man in the seat behind him groaned faintly, drained from wading through the flood. His daughter pressed her infant protectively to her chest, trying to keep the baby warm under the drenched blanket. Morales stood at the tractor's side, occasionally jumping off to clear debris. Sheets of rain whipped across them, forming rivulets that trickled down Tom's jacket and blurred his vision. Redwood County felt like a swollen river basin with no end in sight. He slowed near a battered fence line where partial barbed wire jutted above swirling water. The father moaned again, prompting Tom to glance back. The man's face was pale and his breathing uneven. Tom felt a pang of guilt for forcing him onto this rough trek, but there was no other choice. If they stayed at the flooded farmhouse, the father's condition might worsen. Ahead, the cluster of guard vehicles signaled a fragile lifeline, a chance for real medical care. At times, the tractor's wheels spun in muddy patches, but Tom's careful steering and Morales' quick thinking kept them inching forward. At last, They rolled up to a clearing where 2 National Guard medics hurried over. One carried an IV kit and a defibrillator, while the other wheeled a collapsible stretcher across clumps of wet grass. Tom cut the engine and eased himself from the driver's seat, stretching his tired back. Morales hoisted the ill father into the medic's care, passing along details about his condition. The young mother stayed close, her baby wrapped in a fresh blanket, donated by the guardsman. Thunder boomed in the distance, an unsettling reminder that the day's challenges were far from over. Captain Nolan arrived moments later, clapping Tom on the shoulder. His own fatigue was evident in the slump of his posture, but he forced a smile. "Another successful rescue, Winston. We've got more evac calls coming in from up the road, near the old Adams Mill grain elevator. Water's just below the windows of a trailer park there." Tom winced. The trailer park in question was known to be home to elderly folks on fixed incomes, plus a handful of seasonal workers who rarely had transportation. "We'll go," Tom said at once, ignoring the protest in his aching limbs. Before they could leave, Linda's voice crackled through a guardsman's handheld radio. She was calling from Tom's farmhouse, worried because she'd heard the levee breach threaten to worsen. Tom felt a surge of guilt, imagining her pacing anxiously by the radio. Captain Nolan responded quickly, assuring Linda that Tom was all right and preparing for the next mission. Tom took the radio and explained he wouldn't be back just yet. Despite obvious concern, Linda simply told him to keep safe and promised hot food whenever he returned. Her steadfast faith bolstered Tom's spirit, fueling his resolve. Moments later, Tom climbed onto the tractor, Morales taking a seat on the makeshift passenger step. They followed Nolan's Humvee east, passing farmland that resembled an endless lake. The wind picked up, driving a fine mist of rain sideways and causing droplets to spatter across Tom's face. They rumbled past a collapsed barn roof half submerged, and Tom swallowed a lump in his throat, thinking about the farmer who'd once proudly shown off that barn. Everyone in Redwood County would have rebuilding to do once this crisis passed. But first, they had to keep each other alive. When they finally neared the trailer park, the condition of the road worsened. Deep, debris-filled water lapped at the tractor's tires, and uprooted shrubs bobbed along in the current. Nolan's Humvee took the lead, forging a path where the pavement still held firm. Tom followed carefully, mindful of cracks that hinted at sections ready to crumble. As they got closer, they spotted an elderly woman standing on a porch just above water level, frantically waving a bright orange cloth. Others peered from windows, likely too scared or unable to venture out on their own. Nolan signaled for Tom to stop. 2 guardsmen hopped from the Humvee and approached the old woman, urging her to gather essentials. A moment later, more residents emerged from the trailers, some carrying babies or leading pets on makeshift leashes. Tom cut the tractor's engine as the guardsmen waded through the waist-deep water, guiding folks to the higher ground near the vehicles. This process repeated with each trailer, pounding on doors, checking for anyone inside, then offering help out. Tom watched as an older man stubbornly refused to abandon his cat, cradling the trembling animal while he splashed toward safety. Though the rescue seemed orderly at first, the surging current soon turned the operation chaotic. One trailer's steps gave way, nearly dragging a guardsman under. Another occupant refused to leave until she found her medication, sending precious minutes slipping by. Tom and Morales held ropes across flooded sections, creating improvised handrails for those too weak to balance. The Humvee's driver kept the engine running to power its headlights, shining them into the gloom. Overhead, lightning flickered across thick clouds, and thunder rumbled closer with each passing minute, spurring everyone to hurry. As the last few residents emerged, Captain Nolan announced that further evacuation of this site would have to wait. Storm trackers warned a new torrential downpour could hit within the hour, risking a sudden spike in flood levels. Tom exchanged a worried glance with Morales. The tractor had been vital for crossing certain sections, but if the water rose just a bit more, they might be stranded too. Nolan motioned for the Humvee's driver to start ferrying the rescued residents to a designated shelter. Tom decided to remain behind for a bit longer, making sure no one was left. Waiting from trailer to trailer, Tom and Morales called out, shining flashlights through windows. They found one last occupant, a frail man dozing in a back bedroom, unaware of the urgency outside. He stirred, startled, but quickly gathered his wallet and a photograph of his late wife before allowing them to guide him out. By the time they led him to the tractor, only faint traces of daylight remained. Another peal of thunder rolled overhead, and the sky split open, releasing a punishing deluge. Rain pelted them like bullets, turning the muddy ground into a treacherous quagmire. Tom fired the tractor's engine, wincing as the tires spun on slick clay. With Morales helping the frail man into the passenger step, Tom managed to coax the machine forward. Water sloshed knee-high across the road, and lightning flashed, illuminating the stark devastation in brief, blinding bursts. They struggled along, hearts pounding with every jerk of the wheels. Each time thunder cracked, it felt like the earth itself might tear open. Wind whipped branches overhead, and Tom prayed none would snap and land on them. At last they spotted the red glow of a guard truck's rear lights. Relief washed over Tom as he maneuvered closer, allowing the guardsmen to guide the tractor onto higher ground. They helped the frail man step down, escorting him toward the truck. Lightning flared again, casting eerie shadows across the sodden fields. Morales patted Tom's shoulder, offering a tired grin. Both men were drenched, battered, and bracing for more storms, yet they felt a grim satisfaction in each rescue accomplished. Over the radio, Captain Nolan's voice came through the static, instructing everyone to retreat to safer terrain. As Tom turned the tractor around, he thought of Linda waiting at the farmhouse. He vowed he would see her soon, after helping Redwood County endure yet another tempestuous night. Through eyes, he glimpsed the swirling water ahead, knowing the fight was not finished. Nightfall came quicker than anyone expected, swallowing Redwood County in a deepening gloom. The new round of rainfall pelted roofs and roads, intensifying the flash floods that had already carved destruction throughout the region. Tom Winston, soaked to the bone and worn from hours of rescues, edged his tractor up to a makeshift checkpoint a few miles from his farmhouse. In the headlights of a National Guard truck, Captain Nolan waved him down, shouting to be heard over the torrential downpour. "Tom," the captain called, "we need a quick briefing before you head anywhere else." Tom cut his engine, stepping off the tractor with stiff knees. The wind whipped his hood back and water dripped steadily down his collar. Around them, guardsmen hustled, carrying crates of supplies or loading evacuees into higher clearance vehicles. Tom could see the pinched worry on every face, a collective knowledge that this crisis would stretch long into the night. Captain Nolan led Tom beneath a canvas awning where a lantern glowed on a rickety table. A large county map, water-stained at the edges, was pinned down by 4 stones. "We've lost contact with a cluster of houses near Pinewood Drive," Nolan said, pointing with a gloved finger at a spot on the map. "They're close to the eastern bank of Redwood Creek, and the levee on that side is nearly gone. Last we heard, about 4 families decided to stay put. Now the water's surrounding them." Tom felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Every new rescue site meant precarious travel, more risk, and the possibility that help might not arrive in time. But he nodded grimly. "All right. I can take the tractor, but it won't be quick. The roads are giving out under the current." Nolan's eyes shone with quiet admiration. "You sure? Your wife was on the radio asking after you. You've been at this for hours, Tom. Nobody would blame you if—" Tom cut him off with a tired half-smile. "Linda knows me better than to expect I'll quit now. I'll head over there if you think it'll help." Nolan clapped him on the shoulder. "It will. We'll send Morales with you again if he's still up for it, and I'll radio your wife to let her know you're safe." Tom gulped some water from a canteen a guardsman offered, ignoring the dull ache in his shoulders and the clamminess of his clothes. Exhaustion hovered at the edges of his mind, threatening to cloud his focus. He inhaled deeply, reminding himself that rest could wait until Redwood County's most vulnerable were accounted for. Minutes later, Morales appeared, also drenched and shivering. He offered Tom a weary grin. Ready for more, because the captain said Pinewood's flooding fast. Tom appreciated the soldier's courage and quiet resolve. Let's do what we can. They left the checkpoint with a small convoy, Tom's tractor at the lead, followed by a National Guard cargo truck carrying spare rescue gear. Lightning cracked, illuminating the drowned farmland in ghostly flashes. With each flash, Tom glimpsed broken power poles and collapsed outbuildings scattered like driftwood. The gloom between strikes felt heavier every time, as if nature itself insisted on reminding them of the danger. Tom steered carefully. The tractor's headlights barely penetrated the wall of rain. Every so often, a swirl of water or a leaning tree forced him to slow almost to a crawl. Morales, perched on the side step, kept shining a flashlight ahead, scanning for hazards. Back in Redwood County's calmer days, Pinewood Drive had been a scenic route winding past farmland, leading to a small cluster of modest houses beneath tall pine trees. Now it resembled a swampy labyrinth. They soon encountered a minor landslide of mud and debris blocking half the road. Tom stopped, kneeling in the rain to inspect it. Morales hopped down too, shining his flashlight. "We can clear some of this," Morales muttered, "but the rest might be too heavy." Between them, they managed to drag aside smaller branches and push away enough muck so the tractor could squeeze around. It was slow going, and they both slipped more than once, caking themselves in mud. By the time the tractor maneuvered past the debris, the cargo truck behind them had to find a different angle. Tom felt a pulse of worry. If the truck couldn't make it, they'd be on their own. But after some hair-raising revving, the driver succeeded, forging past the landslide with muddy tires spinning. Not long after, they reached a sign that read, Pinewood Drive. Half submerged in the water, it wobbled each time the wind gusted. Beyond it, the road sloped downward, carrying murky brown floodwater from Redwood Creek's overflow. Tom stopped again, leaning out the tractor window to gauge the depth. "Might be safer if we park here and check on foot," he suggested to Morales. The guardsman agreed. They alerted the driver of the cargo truck to hold position on higher ground. Clutching ropes and flashlights, Tom and Morales set off, trudging waist-deep in the swirling flood. Gusts of wind carried stinging rain against their faces. They could just make out the rooftops of several houses amid the darkness, faintly lit from within by lanterns or battery-powered lamps. That hint of light guided them, an encouraging sign that residents were still there. The first house they came upon had water lapping at its doorstep. Tom rapped on the soggy wood. "Anybody inside?" A moment later, a man opened the door wearing tall boots and a worried expression. "Thank God," he said. "We've been cut off since noon. My wife's in the living room. She's got a bad leg and can't walk far in this water." Morales helped the man gather essentials while Tom stepped inside, shining his flashlight around. The interior was damp, water creeping across the floor. An older woman sat on a kitchen chair, foot propped up. Her relief at seeing rescue was evident in her trembling smile. "We'll carry you out," Tom assured her. With effort, they hoisted the woman. The husband led the way, pushing through swirling water. Outside, the wind hissed through the pines, a low and haunting sound. Their flashlights cut narrow beams, revealing little more than battered fences and floating debris. Once the pair was safely on drier ground near the cargo truck, Tom and Morales pressed on. House after house, they repeated the pattern. Some residents insisted they would stay put, not quite realizing how dire the situation might become if the levee gave way entirely. Others gratefully accepted assistance, wading out with dogs or cradling valuables. One elderly couple refused to leave behind a bedridden brother. Morales called for a stretcher over the radio, so the guardsman back at the truck brought it through the rising flood. Each rescue became more physically draining, and Tom marveled at Morales' endurance, matching him step for step, despite exhaustion. Rain hammered them relentlessly. Sheets of water cascaded off rooftops, swirling around the ankles of those who ventured outside. Lightning continued its erratic strobe, each flash showing fleeting images of heartbreak. A greenhouse in shards, a car half submerged, a child's bicycle drifting away. Tom pushed aside the sorrow each time, determined to focus on the immediate work. If they let the despair in, he knew they would lose the resolve to keep going. Past midnight, they reached the final home at the end of Pinewood Drive. It was a small single-story structure set lower than its neighbors. The front door was ajar, battered by wind. Tom called out, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Silence answered. He and Morales ventured inside, stepping cautiously over the threshold. The living room floor was ankle-deep in water. A couch floated in the corner. A muffled cry made them freeze. Tom swung his flashlight. In a back bedroom, a flashlight flickered, revealing a teenage boy. He was crouched beside an older woman on a mattress that had slid partially underwater. She seemed barely conscious, head lolling to one side. A wave of desperation crossed the boy's face when he saw them. "Grandma's on oxygen," he choked out. "But the power's been out, and I can't get her to stay awake." Morales rushed forward, kneeling beside the woman. "She's breathing, but it's shallow," he murmured, turning to Tom. "We have to move her now." Between them, they carried her out of the bedroom, water sloshing around their shins. The teenage boy grabbed an old backpack that presumably held her medical supplies. Outside, the wind roared. Lightning flared and thunder rattled the windows. Tom felt a surge of dread. This might be one of the last chances to escape before the entire road disappeared. Cautiously, they navigated the swirling current toward the cargo truck. The older woman didn't stir, but her frail breathing continued, each exhale a tiny victory. Morales radioed that they had a medical emergency, requesting immediate transport to a hospital or triage station. The teenage boy, tears mixing with raindrops, clung to Tom. "Thank you," he whispered. Tom gave him a quick squeeze on the shoulder, heart heavy with unspoken sympathy. At the truck, the guardsman helped load the woman into the back, hooking her to a portable oxygen tank they'd brought for such crises. The teenage boy scrambled in after her, worry etched in every line of his face. The driver revved the engine, ready to head for higher ground. Morales nodded at Tom, relief warring with fatigue. "Guess that's everyone here," Morales said quietly. "Ready to call it a night?" Tom paused, scanning the waterlogged horizon. The storm raged on, leaving Redwood County battered and broken, yet Tom's mind drifted to his wife, waiting at home, likely fighting her own fears. He thought of Captain Nolan, Celia, Brent, and the countless others still out there, forging through the darkness to rescue neighbors. "Yeah," Tom finally said, voice hoarse. "Let's head back. Tomorrow's another day." They climbed onto the tractor, turning it around. Each jolt reminded Tom of the wear on his muscles and the deep ache in his bones. As they navigated Pinewood Drive's flooded sections one last time, Tom sensed that, even in the midst of tragedy, Redwood County was bound together in a way it had never been before. When dawn came, they would start again, determined to face whatever fresh challenges the floodwaters delivered. Dawn arrived with a muted glow in the storm-churned sky, revealing a county still drenched and battered from the relentless night. At Tom Winston's farm, the improvised command post buzzed with subdued urgency. Soldiers shuffled around pallets of relief supplies, stepping carefully over puddles that covered the once dry barn floor. Radios blared with overlapping voices, each seeking updates on roads or families in distress. A fresh wave of exhaustion pressed on everyone's shoulders, but they kept moving, driven by duty or desperation. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Linda Winston poured steaming coffee into tin cups for the guards posted outside. She glanced at the clock, nearly 6 in the morning. Since midnight, she had been piecing together sandwiches, refilling coffee pots, and offering whatever comfort she could to the men and women working tirelessly. Her heart clenched every time the radio crackled with Tom's voice. Though she knew he was safe for the moment, the knowledge of danger lurking behind each rescue weighed on her. Occasionally, Linda paused at the window, peering across the yard for any sign of the tractor returning. Down by the barn, Captain Nolan stood over a large county map pinned against a wooden board. A half-dozen guardsmen clustered around him. "The water's receding in certain spots," he announced, running a finger along the lines that represented Redwood Creek. "But the eastern levee breach is still pouring water onto farmland. We estimate another day, maybe two, before the flood stops rising in that sector." A grim murmur passed through the group. One guardsman, his uniform caked with mud, asked quietly, "What about Adams Mill?" "Last I heard, half of it was still underwater." Nolan shook his head. "They're running on generator power at the shelter. We've got folks ferrying in medicine and blankets, but the roads are basically gone. Helicopters can't safely land with these winds either." Tom's arrival cut the conversation short. He trudged across the barn threshold, soaking wet and streaked with dark grime. His eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep. Morales followed him in, equally haggard. At once Linda appeared, pressing a hot cup of coffee into Tom's hands. "Drink," she said, her worry hidden behind a determined gaze. Captain Nolan met them with mild relief. "Give me a status," he said, setting a hand on Tom's shoulder. Tom took a long sip, then began. "We cleared Pinewood Drive. Some folks refused evacuation, but we got the ones who needed medical help. Redwood Creek's flowing across the road now. No telling if it's passable again." Nolan nodded. "I won't send you back that way. We've got a bigger problem in the southwestern quadrant. Several families are unreachable by phone, and the last broadcast from that zone mentioned rising water near the highway intersection. If we wait too long, they might be trapped." He paused, taking in the lines etched on Tom's face. "I can send someone else, Tom." Tom considered for a beat, then exhaled. "Might be better if we go, Captain. We know the layout, and the tractor's proven it can handle deeper water." Morales gave a weary nod, silently agreeing. Though every muscle in Tom's body screamed for rest, the idea of leaving neighbors stranded in the final hours of crisis was unthinkable. Linda caught Tom's eye. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's all right," she whispered. "You do what you have to. Just promise me you'll be careful." Tom nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude that she understood. They shared a brief, gentle embrace before he turned away, scanning the supply crates for anything else they might need. His arms still trembled from the previous night's work, but he forced himself to focus. Morales rummaged through a box of gear, pulling out fresh rope, extra blankets, and a couple of life vests. "Let's stock up properly," he suggested. "I don't want to get out there and realize we're short on supplies." Tom agreed wholeheartedly. They filled a burlap sack with protein bars and water bottles, then secured everything onto the tractor's rear platform. Captain Nolan handed Tom a laminated county map, newly marked with colored lines, indicating flooding severity. "I'll keep in touch over the radio," Nolan said. "They're forecasting more storms by mid-afternoon, so do what you can before that hits." With a final round of handshakes, Tom and Morales climbed back onto the tractor. Linda stood by the barn door, arms folded tight against her chest, watching them pull away. Tom offered a small wave, and then he was gone, lost to the swirling mist that veiled the farm's perimeter. They ventured southwest, where rolling hills usually kept farmland safer from flooding. Yet, Redwood County had never seen water volumes like this. In low stretches of road, shallow ponds lapped the tractor's tires. Morales kept checking the radio, reporting scattered contact from neighbors who had self-evacuated during the night. "People are taking shelter in a church up on Hilltop Road," he relayed. "So at least some folks got out in time. But others might still be in harm's way." They aimed for a small cluster of houses near the old quarry, rarely vulnerable to flooding in typical storms. This time, though, Redwood Creek's overflow had spilled across miles of farmland, swallowing roads that once seemed immune. Tom navigated carefully, eyes flicking between the waterlogged fields and the looming horizon. Dark clouds still crowded the sky, threatening fresh misery. Eventually, they spotted a single light, glowing in the window of a modest ranch-style home. The front yard was shin-deep in water, and an abandoned sedan floated crookedly at the edge of the driveway. Tom halted the tractor. He and Morales dismounted, wading toward the porch. A dog barked inside, sharp and frantic. Through the door's glass pane, Tom saw a frightened face peering out, a teenage girl, perhaps 14. She opened the door just enough to speak. "Please help," she said shakily. "My grandpa can't move. He uses a wheelchair, and we can't get through the water." Morales reassured her, stepping inside. The interior smelled of wet carpet and stale air. In the living room, an older man sat in his wheelchair, face drawn with concern. "I told her we should leave yesterday," he said, voice trembling. "But it all rose so fast overnight." Gently, Tom nodded. "We'll get you to higher ground." They gathered a few essentials in a duffel bag, then carefully lifted the wheelchair. The teenage girl followed, clutching a small dog in her arms, tears trailing down her cheeks. Outside, the water reached nearly to the seat of the wheelchair, forcing Tom and Morales to hoist the man completely. It took them several minutes of slow progress before they reached the tractor. Morales tied the wheelchair securely, while Tom helped the girl and dog onto the rear platform. The older man grimaced at the precarious setup, but Tom assured him it was safer than waiting. With everyone on board, they continued down the flooded road, hoping to find a path to the church on Hilltop. Each jolt made the older man groan, and the dog whined, but they pressed forward. As they traveled, they encountered more signs of the chaos left behind by the nights of flash flooding. A washed-out culvert forced them to make a risky detour through a neighbor's field, where the tractor's tires sank alarmingly in soft mud. Morales hopped off to push from behind, gritting his teeth until the tractor lurched free. Overhead, the clouds thickened. Rain began anew, slanting in cold sheets that plastered clothes to skin. The teenage girl tried to shield her trembling dog, tears mingling with rain. Finally, they spotted a vantage point where the road rose up, curving toward Hilltop's church spire. Tom exhaled in relief as the tractor found firmer ground. Sure enough, at the crest, they saw a group of volunteers directing vehicles into the church's parking lot. A hand-painted sign read, "Evacuation Shelter, all welcome." Morales hailed a volunteer who rushed over with a wheelchair ramp. Carefully, they helped the older man descend from the tractor. The teenage girl stumbled off, clutching her dog. She mumbled heartfelt thanks, tears still brimming. Tom nodded, a heavy sense of relief settling in. Here, they at least had medical supplies and a generator. Another volunteer guided them inside, promising soup and dry blankets. Tom and Morales lingered only a moment. The day's storms hadn't stopped, and Redwood County still had pockets of stranded residents. If the next wave of downpour slammed them, some might not escape. "Let's push on a bit further," Tom said, leaning over the tractor's steering wheel. Morales swiped rain from his forehead. "Lead the way." As they descended from Hilltop Road, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing down the valley. The radio crackled with urgent chatter. Possible sightings of people stuck on rooftops near the southwestern edge. Rumors of more levee leaks. Redwood County, battered and weary, still held together by grit and neighborly resolve. Tom realized he had lost track of time, whether morning had fully broken or if midday was approaching. The sky's ominous hue gave no indication. All that mattered was forging ahead to the next rescue, trusting that eventually the waters would retreat and Redwood County might begin to heal. Linda's unwavering support lit a spark in his heart, even now, reminding him that home waited. that love steadied his hand. He promised himself that, once the final family was safe, he would return to her, battered but unbroken. All day, the swollen waters of Redwood County's farmland had claimed roads, fence lines, and fields, forcing families to huddle on rooftops or upstairs floors. Helicopters roared overhead when the weather permitted, dropping supplies or attempting precarious rescues. Meanwhile, on the ground, local farmers and volunteers continued shuttling between marooned homesteads in battered trucks, canoes, and Tom Winston's sturdy tractor. Though exhausted in mind and body, Tom pressed on. Each call crackling across the radio spurred him to keep driving. With every home he left behind, another needed him. Redwood County's crisis refused to yield, even as dusk approached again. Shortly after midday, he and Morales had delivered an ailing older woman to the high school gym, now transformed into a bustling shelter. Families milled about in borrowed clothes, many numb with shock, but still managing smiles of relief whenever a new arrival stumbled through the doors. Rows of cots lined the basketball court, and volunteers handed out warm soup. Tom barely paused, hugging Linda in passing. She urged him to rest, but he couldn't stop, not with the radio swarming with pleas for help. He downed 2 cups of coffee, refueled his tractor, and headed back into the watery battlefield. Late in the afternoon, a break in the cloud cover gave Redwood County a few hours of hesitant sunlight. Helicopters resumed short flights, dropping supplies to pockets of stranded families. Some roads even re-emerged from the flood, though mud and debris made them barely passable. Tom used that window of relative calm to guide his tractor across stretches, reaching folks who had called for help days earlier. On one farm, a couple in their 70s sat perched on their roof's peak with a black Labrador. Their barn had collapsed, but their gratitude soared when Tom ferried them back to safety. By early evening, the storm reasserted itself, thunderheads rolling in from the west with menacing speed. Emergency alerts crackled again, warning of sudden downpours that could reverse the modest progress. Captain Nolan, coordinating from a stable section of highway, radioed to say that any rescues in outlying districts had to be completed immediately or abandoned for the night. A pang of guilt coursed through Tom. He knew not everyone had been reached. But continuing after dark, amid intensifying storms, would risk the lives of rescuers and those they aimed to save. As twilight crept over Redwood County, the final retreat began. Tom guided his tractor back toward his farm, Morales in the passenger seat, both men quiet, as the headlights carved trembling beams through the murk. Water still flooded the low-lying pasture land, though the raging currents had subdued into sluggish expanses. Twice, they had to detour around gaping holes where the pavement had simply dissolved. Every bump jarred Tom's exhausted muscles. Once they reached Winston Farm, they found Linda waiting beneath the barn's overhang, shining a lantern to guide them in. She rushed forward, her face etched with worry and relief, as Tom killed the engine and slumped in the seat. "Come inside," Linda murmured, helping him dismount. "You're shaking." Tom realized she was right. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and he wavered on his feet. Morales steadied him from the other side. They half-walked, half-carried Tom into the farmhouse kitchen, where a dull warmth from the wood stove eased the chill in his bones. Outside, the guard continued its urgent tasks, unloading supplies, coordinating radios. But Linda was determined to care for Tom, pressing a steaming mug into his grip and urging him to sit. Morales, equally drained, sank into a chair, head bowed, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Captain Nolan soon stepped in, hat in hand, face grave. He had just received word that the storm system might linger another 24 hours, threatening more flash floods across already saturated ground. "I'm pulling everyone back to safer zones tonight," he told them quietly. "We've done everything we can in the field, but I'm not risking lives in pitch-black darkness with these weather reports." Tom nodded, relief and guilt mingling in his chest. The thought of anyone still stranded tore at him, yet a wave of gratitude surged through him, that for a few hours at least, Redwood County's rescuers might rest. Throughout the evening, soldiers and volunteers trickled into Winston Farm for a brief respite. Linda tirelessly ladled out bowls of soup, replaced soggy socks with dry ones, and offered encouraging words. Tom collapsed on an old couch in the living room. Lulled by the low murmur of voices drifting in from the kitchen, he fought to stay awake, mind racing with images of half-submerged houses and trembling hands reaching for rescue. Before he knew it, exhaustion claimed him. He awoke hours later to the gray half-light of dawn filtering through the window, the storm's drumming replaced by a muted drizzle. Stepping onto the porch, Tom was struck by how the floodwaters had receded overnight. Patches of soggy grass emerged where once a lake had shimmered. Though Redwood Creek still ran high, some sense of normalcy hovered on the horizon. Smoke curled from neighbors' chimneys, and the relentless hum of helicopters softened. Captain Nolan's voice echoed from the barn, rallying a final push to distribute clean water and supplies before the Guard's eventual departure. Tom felt a pang at the thought of the National Guard leaving. Without their coordination, Redwood County might have drowned in chaos. But the worst seemed finally behind. Over the next few hours, Tom helped load the last crates of relief supplies onto departing trucks. When the guardsmen offered tearful goodbyes, townspeople gathered, clapping and handing out baked goods or handwritten notes of thanks. A hush fell as the final helicopter rose from the makeshift landing zone behind Tom's barn, its spinning rotors whipping up dust and stray leaves. Then it was gone, carrying away the camouflage uniforms that had become synonymous with salvation. Redwood County stood on its own once more, scarred by the flood but not defeated. Now came the long road of rebuilding together. For Tom and Linda, the days that followed blurred with the tasks of clearing debris, salvaging what they could from waterlogged fields, and checking in on neighbors. Tom's trusty tractor bore the dents and grime of countless rescues, yet he refused to clean it just yet. "A reminder," he said wryly, patting the hood. Linda quietly nursed her own wounds, emotional bruises from sleepless nights and constant dread. Still, each morning they woke to signs of hope. Children playing in muddied yards, farmers helping each other repair fences, and the knowledge that Redwood County had weathered its toughest storm in memory. Gradually, officials arrived to assess damages, offering low-interest loans or government relief. Tom noticed how outsiders seemed astonished by the community's resilience, amazed that farmers and townsfolk had orchestrated so many rescues before official agencies could respond. Newspapers ran headlines praising Redwood County's spirit. Morale soared when school reopened in a week, children cheering as they stepped off buses onto still damp roads. Though entire fields were ruined and some homes beyond repair, a collective sense of triumph ran through each conversation. The flood would not define them. Rather, the county's unity and compassion in the face of crisis would. On a crisp morning 2 weeks later, Tom and Linda stood at the edge of their property, surveying the receding flood line. Brown, silt-laden patches marred the once green fields, but the tractor tracks remained, a testament to countless rescues. Linda slipped her hand into Tom's. "You did more than I ever thought one farmer could," she said softly, eyes glistening with pride. Tom shook his head. "Wasn't just me. It was everyone, working side by side." In the distance, the faint sound of children laughing in a yard drifted on the cool breeze. Redwood County would heal, in time, and together.